Welcome to Country Care to Clothing Flair. And what really gives you a sense of belonging? Welcome to a 15-minute video allowing you to relax and learn about family farmers and the wisdom of beautiful wool. Later on, we listen to Persia discussing synthetics versus natural fibre with Trevor. They're both from New York. But first, Chapter 2.12, A Sense of Belonging. Joe Vanderberg grew up on the basalt soils his ancestors had tilled. The basalt patchwork of paddocks stitched together by boundary fences, creek lines and memories. The Vanderberg farm, nestled in the gentle green swells outside Willow Creek, was more than land. It was home, heritage, and the backbone of Joan's very identity. If you ask him where he was from, he'd point to the rusty mailbox at the end of the drive and say, "Right here," with pride that ran as deep as the river that cut through the bottom paddock. From the age of 5, Joe dawns began with the crow of the rooster and the soft murmur of his parents' voices from the kitchen. The house, old but sturdy, had sheltered generations. Photos of grandfathers and great-uncles lined the hallways, all with sunburned faces and dirt under their fingernails. Joe's mother, Margaret, taught him that the farm was more than a business. "This is a place you belong to," she'd say. "It belongs to you." Joe learned the rhythm of the land by heart. When to plant, when to harvest, how to read the clouds and the seasons. The Vanderbergs ran sheep and grew wheat, but the true crop was kinship. Joe, his sister, and younger brother Will spent countless afternoons chasing lambs, climbing the old peppercorn tree and singing along with the radio while helping Mum bake bread for the shearers. Their father, Michael, was a quiet man, but for his lesson was lasting. "Hard work," he'd say, "is what ties us together." The farm anchored the Vanderbergs in a world that sometimes felt unmoored. When Joe was 10, a flood swept through Willow Creek, leaving fences twisted and crops drowned. Neighbours arrived, tools in hands, and the community rebuilt together, sharing stories and tea in the muddy aftermath. Joe felt for the first time the land memories lay not just in the work but in the shared experience. As Joe grew, so did the understanding of the farm's legacy. He watched his grandfather, now stooped with age, walk the fields at sunset. "Your great-granddad built this house," the old man would recall, "when there was nothing but bush and hope." Joe listened, soaking in tales of drought, bumper harvest and the endless dances between fortune and hardship. School came and went, and while some classmates dreamed of cities and bright lights, Joe never doubted where he'd belong. He loved the quiet strength of the farm, the way the sun caught the dew on the wheat heads, the laughter around the kitchen table after a long day. The Vanderbergs marked the calendar by shearing season, lambing, harvest and family milestones, birthdays, weddings and even funerals held in the old church down the road. The farm taught Joe discipline, resilience and a sense of purpose. He learned to fix machinery with Will, to mend fences with Liz, and to share in the joys and the burden of rural life. Evenings were spent swapping stories around the fire. Joe's father always emphasised, "We're part of something bigger, the land, the work and each other." Joe's childhood memories intertwined with the Vanderbergs. The scent of fresh-cut hay, the thrill of riding the battered quad bike, the comfort of watching storms roll in from the veranda. The farm's barn was a piece of magic, where kitchen mewed in the hayloft, and Liz's laughter echoed as they raced to finish the chores before dinner. The siblings' bond was forged in these shared experiences, each task adding another stitch to the fabric of their lives. Community gatherings, like cricket matches in the back paddock and autumn bonfires, turned the farm into a hub of rural life. Joe grew up surrounded by neighbours who treated each other as extended family, sharing harvests and hardships alike. The farm was a centre of emotional well-being, a place where joy was celebrated and sorrows were weathered together. The years brought both bounty and hardship. Drought struck when Joe was 16, testing the Vanderbergs' patience and resolve. The land, usually vibrant, turned brittle and brown. Joe and his siblings worked harder, hauling water for the sheep, rationing feed, watching their parents face growed lines and with worry. Margaret's optimism never faltered. "We've survived worse," she would say, "and we'll survive this too." Joe's father Michael became ill one winter, his strength fading. Joe took on more responsibility, juggling schoolwork and farm duties. Liz and Will did their share, but Joe felt the weight of the legacy pressing on his shoulders. The farm was no longer just a backdrop, it was a promise, a trust to be kept. Michael's passing left a quiet ache in the house, but his wisdom lingered in Joe's heart. The family gathered, sharing stories of Michael's kindness, his steadfast work ethic, his love for the land. Joe stood in the moonlight yard that night, feeling his heart's presence in the soil, the trees and the very air. He swore to honour his legacy, to keep the farm strong for those who would follow. After graduation, Joe faced a choice: continue on the farm or pursue study in the city. The allure of new horizons tugged at him, but the thought of leaving was unbearable. He travelled for a year, working on vineyards and cattle stations, learning new techniques and meeting people who knew nothing of Willow Creek. Yet every sunset reminded him of home, of Margaret's gentle laughter, Will's easy camaraderie, and Liz's fierce determination. Joe realised that no place felt quite like the Vanderberg farm. It was not just land, but the living sum of memories, relationships and unspoken promise. He returned, older and wiser, with fresh ideas to strengthen the farm. Liz took up accounting. Will focused on machinery. And together they began to modernise, trialling crop rotation, investing in renewable energy and hosting farm stays to share their rural life with city visitors. One relentless summer, the region faced the worst drought in a generation. Rain evaporated before touching the ground, tanks ran dry and the wheat shriveled. The Vanderberg farm, like many in Willow Creek, was stretched to breaking point. The cost of feed soared and market prices plummeted. Joe and Will worked long hours, desperate to keep the livestock alive. Exhaustion frayed tempers. Liz suggesting selling a portion of the land to stay afloat. Margaret, now frail, clung to every acre as if letting go would erase history itself. Joe felt torn between duty of his family past and the need to secure his future. Arguments echoed in the kitchen, the weight of generations pressing down. One evening, after a day spent burying a dozen ewes lost to the heat, Joe found himself alone in the barn. He stared at the faded initials carved in the timber post. M.V. de B, his father, Michael Van der Berg. Joe broke, tears running down his face. Anger with grief mixing with dust. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. At that moment Will entered, silently handing Joe a mug of tea. Outside, Liz gathered the neighbours for a meeting. They sat beneath the peppercorn tree, each family sharing stories of struggle and hope. The community pooled resources, organised a water convoy and set up a relief fund. Joe realised the farm's true strength is not just in the soil but in the people. Revitalised, Joe and his siblings made tough decisions. They sold a small parcel of land, invested the money for future growth. With the return of the rains, the land slowly revived. Wildflowers bloomed along the creek, and the wheat stood tall once more. Margaret watched from the veranda, smiled quietly. Joe became a mentor to younger farmers in Willow Creek, sharing the lessons learned, the importance of community, the necessity of embracing change and the enduring value of land. Liz managed the farm accounts and outreach, while Will oversaw machinery innovation. Their bond, forged in adversity, was unbreakable. Joe married his childhood friend Alex, and together they raised their own children under the Vanderberg roof. The old photos in the hallway gained new faces, and the cycle of work, laughter and shared stories continue. Joe taught his kids to read the sky, care for the animals and honour the land's legacy. "This is your place," he'd say, "but it's bigger than just us." As the years passed, Joe came to the understanding that belonging was not merely feeling, but an action, a promise, a legacy lived and a community embraced. The Vanderberg were living testament to resilience and love, to the bonds that tied people to land together. Every sunrise brought new challenges and new joys, but the foundation remained. Family, community and enduring heart at home. The story of Joe the farmer reminds us that life, like farming, is an endless cycle of seasons, of loss and renewal, hardship and hope. In the end, the measure of life is not the acres held or the crop harvested, but the roots put down, the values passed on, and the sense of belonging that gives us strength and weather every storm. The farm was different now, leaner, wiser, changed by hardship, yet held together by the basalt soil of belonging.
There is a lot of discussion at the moment about whether our clothing should be made from natural or synthetic fabrics, especially because if you go shopping, it does feel like the stores are inundated with plastic clothes. I have received a lot of questions from my audience on the topic, but I'm not the most knowledgeable. I err on the side of caution. I buy a lot of things made out of natural fibers, but I know there is a place for synthetics in our clothes and in our wardrobe, so I wanted to talk to someone who's a little bit more knowledgeable about it. So, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Trevor. I own William Ellery, which is an outdoor apparel company based here in New York. And we make clothing sometimes out of new fibers, sometimes out of old fabrics, but we use both natural and synthetic fibers.
If you could give a brief overview of your understanding, like what even the difference is between natural fibers and synthetics, because I feel like there is sort of a false dichotomy because everything comes from the earth, you know, there's nothing that we're creating out of thin air, there's nothing that's like fake and something that's real necessarily, but what do you find the main division is between those two things?
I think the division is between refinement and a chemical change. So like taking cotton, which is a form of cellulose, or something like rayon, which is also cellulose. In cotton, the fiber is refined, but the fiber remains intact, whether it's from the plant or in the garment. Whereas the cellulose fiber that comes from bamboo, that they make rayon out of, is completely stripped and denatured and chemically changed into a synthetic fiber, and a new fiber is born. So like the difference being like a natural fiber is something that exists in its natural state that is then refined, whether it be like combed, or it gets a wash, or it goes through some sort of enzyme process.
Yeah.
And a synthetic fiber is something that was not a fiber in its origin and has been created.
Historically, I want to learn about the start of William Ellery. What was like the first thing you manufactured and how did you go about that process?
The first thing I made was socks, wool socks, and that was in an effort to convince my then girlfriend, now wife, to wear wool socks in the summer. I really like wearing wool socks all year round because they just keep your foot health good. They you don't sweat like you do in cotton socks. I think a lot of people wear like those black cotton athletic socks, which I despise. Those are like the slimiest thing. And then like after years of wearing them, I had no idea how bad they were. Wool is it's like a styrofoam cooler on your foot. So it's like it either keeps you warm or keeps you cold. Whatever you're putting in there is like what it keeps.
Before we get into specifics, do you have maybe broad generalizations about what natural fibers are good for in clothing and what synthetics are good for and what they're also each bad at?
Natural fibers are better for living in.
Yeah.
And synthetic fibers are better for performing in.
Okay.
A lot of the outdoors can be done in a very tame setting, like small hikes, hanging out on the beach, like those kinds of things. Natural fibers are great because you're not having to repel any water or protect against any elements or not die from exposure. But with synthetics, you are hopefully in a situation where you do need to do those things, like go into the water. And like it used to be wool bathing suits, but like now it's nylon and lycra, and I'm happy for that because it's like much more comfortable to go into the water or to be rained on or to be snowed on. Like in like living settings, like being in a metropolis or like in your home, like natural fibers are the way to go. But like when you're going outside and actually facing the elements, synthetics perform a lot better.
Yeah.
Mainly because they're a shield against water. One like wants to get rid of it and one wants to attract it. And because our bodies produce water, the natural fibers feel more comfortable because they want to hold the water for us.
And so in your very first sock, were you thinking 100% wool?
I was thinking 100% wool, but what I didn't realize is you can't do a 100% wool sock without making a lumpy sock. Socks are essentially a mesh of nylon or a supporting synthetic fiber with elastic to give it a bit of like adhesion to the body form.
Yeah.
And then you kind of drape all of that in as much wool as you can. So just a very small amount of synthetics makes a sock be able to expand and contract, which wool does not like to do because it's a very spiky substance. And it also just allows the product to last a lot longer. So it's more comfortable, it lasts a lot longer, and it still has all the properties of natural fibers. In New Zealand, there's an animal called brush-tailed possum, which exists in other places like Australia, but it is an invasive species to New Zealand, and the government is actively eradicating it. So we buy the byproduct from the government and mix it into merino socks.
And which ones are those?
So some of these are, this is possum, this is possum, this is possum, these are possum.
Oh, okay. Is there a benefit to that fiber?
Yeah, so possum hair is like, it's like beaver hair or bear fur. It's a long, thin, hollow fiber.
Okay.
And with any insulation, you're trying to trap air, whether that be like down or wool or polyester, sleeping bags, like you're trying to trap air because that is what conducts heat the worst. So with that small added fiber that has a hollow space, it traps a little bit more air per weight. It's also a very like oily, thin fiber, like a bear fur is similar, but it's a much larger follicle.
Yeah.
So it'd be like very scratchy and like almost like toothpicks in your socks. But because these are like much smaller fibers, you barely feel them. They have like kind of a soft quality.
Yeah.
The key takeaway is the measure of life of the values passed on, the sense of belonging that gives us strength to weather every storm. And remember, life's short, find your joy, and always remember it so you always enjoy it. Thank you.